Welcome to the Glass Lab podcast, where we talk all things product development. It's our goal every month to introduce you to the people, ideas, and development tools that are shaping the hardware products we all use every day. Welcome back, everybody, to the Glass Lab podcast. Today, I've got Emily Atkinson, who is a venture analyst at IU Ventures. So super cool to be on the show with us today. Joining me is Ben Ettinger, our director of product. And of course, I'm Drew here, the CTO at Glassboard. So yeah, thanks for joining us today, Emily. I'm excited to learn more about, just you and your role at, IU Ventures. I'm kind of just curious how you got into this role. As we were talking about before the podcast, scientists in the VC world aren't all that common. So yeah, I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Scientists, in the VC world, they're not super common in the Midwest, especially probably Indiana, but they are very common on the coasts. And if I ever wanted to work for like a large biotech VC, usually PhDs or MDs are required. I was super into science, like always, even growing up, and then decided to pursue a PhD just to kind of become like an expert in learning more about diseases and developing treatments. So my PhD is from IU School of Medicine in anatomy and cell biology, and I did a lot of drug discovery in different bone and blood disorders at that time. And then my PI, or like my mentor, he discovered a gene, developed a drug target for it, and then he just decided to retire. And he was like, oh, we did it. And I was like, we didn't do anything yet. And we did specifically, that was in osteoporosis, which is a debilitating bone disease that affects the aging population and postmenopausal women. There are currently only 3 bone building drugs on the market, and they all stopped working after 2 years, which is crazy. And so I studied why that was happening and then developed a drug target to improve the efficacy. And then, he just kind of like retired. And I was like, well, this still isn't in patients. And so that was 6 months before I graduated. And so then I decided to look at other career options and never dreamed of becoming a venture capitalist, that's for sure. But I knew a lot about patenting. I knew a lot about communication, and then obviously like deep research skills. And IU Ventures was looking for a life science expert at the time that could be taught the business. And I always say, I think this is what sold me to get the job. It's easier to take a PhD and teach them business than an MBA and teach them organic chemistry. And I think that's a pretty valid,
valid argument for sure.
I was like, I'll stay in my lane, but this is my lane.
Yeah. I really think it is cool to see just in general, more technical people like getting involved, I think, in entrepreneurship, business, even sometimes like the finance world, stuff like that. You probably even take that to a logical conclusion, even with like politics and other areas, right? It seems like for a long time, those worlds just didn't mix a whole lot. And I've talked to a lot of people recently, it seems like, that are mixing in those worlds. Like you said, doctors that are now getting into the entrepreneurial, the VC space. And I think it's just interesting to see more of that like front line people that are in the science or that are actually, doing the medicine, also then joining the VC world to kind of bring that like expertise and perspective into that realm, right? So it's not just all about the pure dollars and cents and speculative work, but it is based in this case, science or in the more like technical realm, which is neat to see. Oh yeah.
And I love technically trained people because I feel like we're just really good at problem solving. We're really good at critical thinking. It's like, obviously I have this scientific expertise, but it's like I'm really good at like critical thinking skills and solving problems. And then I think seeing like big picture of it all too, and like knowing what questions to ask. As you all know, it's really easy to get caught up in a lot of the details. So I always love working with technical people, including engineers, but obviously favor scientists.
That's okay.
But it is.
We do really, too. Given the opportunity to work with another engineer or scientist,
Yeah, so it is fun to see more people use skills like in the real world in a way.
Yeah. I also think, again, just bringing that whole, quantitative over qualitative approach maybe to the process. Because, again, I do think that the old school business world is a lot, and particularly in VC, it's a lot of that like, I'm investing because, my gut tells me, or, I'm investing because, I really like the, the vibes that the founder puts off or something, right?
Yeah.
And again, sometimes that's that, right? I mean, the people side of investing is super important, but I also think that it's sometimes interesting to have folks in the world that are like, hey, can we quantify our investments, and can we look into this a little bit deeper to figure out like why are the ones that are succeeding exactly. And why are the ones that aren't, and can we be a little bit more pragmatic about the approach to that, right?
Yeah, and that's like the fun part, because the formulas that I knew, like maybe from PhD life, are not the same formulas that apply to VC life. And so being able to trying like to merge those two worlds, and then realizing, yeah, there's a lot of other variables that will go into this formula to determine success. And it is sometimes vibes, and it is sometimes like the founder's expertise or personality even. Those things also carry weight. But then figuring out the balance of the opportunity, I think is the fun part for me now.
Sure. I guess kind of just jumping into your role at IU Ventures. I mean, I guess what kinds of approaches do you take when it comes to investment opportunities? And we talked a little bit about this already. I mean, would you say you're more data driven, or is it more kind of like you're talking about, like, are you investing in ideas? Are you investing in founders? I mean, what kind of moves the needle for you all when you're looking at those different opportunities?
Yeah, I can go into like our investment thesis a little bit. So IU Ventures, we invest in companies with strong IU DNA, meaning that the founder or someone in the C-suite is an IU alumni, faculty, staff, student, or the licensee of an IU technology. We have two different investment vehicles. We have our venture fund, which I'm on, like I help manage that. And then we also have our IU Angel Network. So angels with ties to IU can invest their own capital in IU companies. So for the venture fund, it's definitely, we do early stage investing, seed to Series A. And so that one is a lot more data driven. We only invest in life science and software companies out of that fund. And our fund is actually evergreen by nature, which means we're not tied to this 10-year cap of investing like traditional venture funds are. And we also don't have any limited partners. And so any funds that are realized just go back into the fund. And so it's kind of like a self-fulfilling legacy, meaning though we have to be really good at venture capital to keep that cash like.
So would you say you're almost structured more like an endowment than a traditional VC fund, or?
We're structured more of like a non-for-profit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, and so we do a lot of more data-driven approaches because we have to. Any fundraising we do is technically considered like a donation. And so again, like we really rely on acquisitions to keep our capital influx. Versus the Angel Network, they do a lot of pre-seed deals. So sometimes those are just ideas where, this is where the product's at today. It's probably not great, but who are the founders? What's the execution look like? And is this the team to really get the job done? Do they know their weaknesses? Are they going to hire for their weaknesses? And things like that. So versus for the life science investing, a lot of it is kind of working backwards and like, who are the acquirers? It's so say like big pharma, what are they acquiring in? Is it cardiovascular health? Is it diabetes? And then taking a step back, how much money do you need to raise to get there? What are the regulatory steps? Are you like a first mover to the space, which is a different connotation in life science than in software or like hard tech, because now we're going to have to write new CPT codes or like, go down that route. And so that's going to take more time. And then, kind of like working backwards and figuring out, what's an actual reasonable investment opportunity. And it's difficult, but it's also fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I find it funny that that piece you said there about, first mover, right? It's a big advantage in a lot of things, but we can appreciate the fact that, medical, it's almost like, if you're able to do a 510K versus having to be the first person to do whatever, it's just so much easier if there's already a predicate device or something else in the market that you can look to as far as like the regulatory environment is concerned, or even just knowing that it's possible to get through the process, right? I mean, there's some stuff where, despite your best efforts, the FDA is just going to look at it and they're going to go, the risks are too high. Like we're not going to approve this. Like, no matter, how many different things you do, like just this thing you're trying to do, like we're not going to allow it, right?
Yeah, and I think it's hard with, when speaking to scientists, because they study diseases because they're passionate about it, not necessarily for the financial return of the opportunity. And so taking something like coming out of the lab and then For example, like the osteoporosis drugs, it's like, okay, well, there are only 3, so there's like an unmet need for that. But if you're targeting only postmenopausal women, like your market size just shrinks tremendously. And so finding the actual translational potential and market potential is a big hiccup, because they're like, oh, well, everybody should care about this. There's only 3 drugs on the market. And it's like, I care about it because my PhD is in that. You guys might not care about it because,
Right.
you have a lower, chance of getting osteoporosis. And so it's just finding out that sweet space of like, yes, your research is really cool and important, but in order for it to get into patients, like it still has to have like huge market potential.
Yeah, I think we run into that as engineers a lot as well, even in the product development world, which is just because you can develop a feature or you can improve something in a product. I think that's just like in our DNA and our nature to constantly be looking for like improvements.
Oh, yeah.
You also have to put your business hat on and go, should we improvement? What is the ROI?
Yeah.
How much does it cost to improve this versus, what's that, going to look like as far as like, users buying additional units of the product or curing this like need. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to see. Again, I think that's again what makes it really interesting, being able to kind of, in your case, dive into both elements of the world, is sort of being able to see both the capitalistic business sense for doing certain things, but also then looking at it through the lens of like, the scientists, what can be done, what improvements can we make for society, that kind of piece of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people get caught up on like the scientist or an engineer. It's always going to have needs for improvement. But at some point, it's like you have to say, oh, this is good enough. Like we got to take it to market. And that's a really hard conversation for a lot of scientists to have. But it's an important one, because you can be in the lab for literally your whole career and not do anything. So, or at least not make a drug, but you're doing good work, but you're not commercializing it. So,
Right. You can iterate ad infinitum.
oh yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the big things I try to do at Glassboard is sort of that piece, right? I can get just as excited about this feature, while at the same time seeing that it's not pragmatic to implement it now, or maybe ever. But at the very least, let's talk about when it should roll out to make this make business sense. And it sounds like that's sort of a parallel for you, but like I can get excited about the science, but I can also wear the business hat and see if there's any legs on this thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. I guess overall, I mean, if you look at IU Ventures compared to the other VCs in the world, I mean, where do you think your strengths lie? Maybe some of the weaknesses. I mean, what differentiates, would you say, IU Ventures from some of the other funds? And that we talked somewhat about just the nature of your backing and how that drives some of the decision-making process as far as what to invest in and how you invest. But I'm just kind of curious overall, like where you see yourselves fitting in the greater, venture ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, our angel network is definitely one of the better angel networks that's tied to like a university. So we're really strong at that. And we've been helping a lot of other like Big Ten schools, for example, set up their own angel networks. We also have the largest medical school in the world. And so we're really strong at like innovation. We're not so great at, again, like translating it. And so I think that there are gaps there, and there are people doing good work here, but it kind of starts with, for science, it's like you've got to patent it through the university, which is sometimes fun, sometimes not so fun, but like you did discover it using their research dollars. So going through that tech transfer process, and then starting up, the company itself. And then again, so we're super strong at ideas here. I will say it's like the scientist who founded the weight loss drugs is like an IU alumni. And so, everyone talks about the Hoosier humbleness and being more communicative of like what we're good at, but we have really strong like science and engineering here. But again, just translating it into companies is something we definitely struggle with. And so setting up networks, like IU has over 750,000 living alumni. And so connecting the people who can help build the company. It's like, okay, I have the scientists, and then we have the Kelley School of Business, like a really renowned business school, and merging those two through networking opportunities is something we're decent at, but I think we could be better at compared to other universities, especially. And then I think that's a strength, or it could be a superpower when talking about other VCs as well. They don't have the network that we have.
Yeah, I think we see that as well. I definitely think like Indiana lately has been putting more time and attention into what I would call just the startup ecosystem and getting businesses started in Indiana, as opposed to, I feel like for a long time, even I think if you look at like some of the Indiana economic development resources and things are all about like, what big business can we get to come here or expand here or invest here or whatever, right? And I think that's fine. I mean, obviously, those dollars are sometimes the fastest ROI, right? But you're competing with every other state for those incentives, and I feel like sometimes it seems like a race to the bottom. Sometimes, right? Like, okay, if Indiana can give us a better deal than Ohio, and then Ohio's competing with Illinois, and like eventually someone is going to like win that business. But by time they do, is that still as good of a deal for the state as if, you were to go play in a space with a little less competition or whatever, right? And I definitely think it's inspiring to see hopefully more investment both from IU, Purdue, the institutions, as well as, the state of Indiana in terms of giving founders, or in this case, even scientists, founders, the right resources to take their ideas and then actually craft a business around them.
Oh, yeah. I think we have to be a little bit more sustainable and efficient in how we're growing companies. As you probably know, it's like we're really good at putting together seed rounds, but we really struggle putting together Series A rounds. We don't have those check sizes in the state to put together Series A round, especially in life science. It's going to be $75 million.
Yep.
And so it's my job to find those VCs on the coasts that are interested in investing in emerging ecosystem like Indiana, and helping finding like their sweet spot and like advocating. It's funny, like one of my portfolio founders, they're trying to fundraise and they don't only have to sell their company, they have to sell the state of Indiana, why they want to build a company here, because larger VCs, they just want to pluck us up and put us in Boston or San Francisco because they know how to build a company there.
Yep.
And so that's been an interesting perspective. But I will say, I'm still kind of in the beginning of my career. I think it's really cool to learn in an emerging environment, because I think I have a lot more opportunities to learn how to build an ecosystem in Indy than if I ever like went to Boston. So I am like really hopeful, and, I'm glad that the state is pushing more towards like that ecosystem development.
And I think they're trying to, I think they're at least aware of that exact problem that you just said, which is the Series A problem, right? Which is that, even if we do a really good job at seed, even if we do a great job of like getting founders the resources they need to start companies, it's like we then need to have the fuel to take them and grow them. Otherwise, again, we also are still losing out, because at the end of the day, even if they stay here, if the vast majority of that post Series A investment is outside of the state of Indiana, look at the cap table by time they have an exit, and it's like how many of those dollars came back into the state of Indiana, right? Like if we did all the effort to get them there and 80% of the returns on that investment go right back out of the state of Indiana, to your point, it's really hard to then, have that pool of resources or success, or even in some cases, it's like you look at big exits in a lot of cities that can fuel an entire another round of companies, right? All of those people that were involved, those founders, those early employees or whatever, when they have a good exit, a lot of those people are obviously pretty entrepreneurially minded. A lot of them are going to be serial entrepreneurs. And so if they have that capital on hand to go do the next thing, that's also something where you kind of get this feedback loop of success breeds success, right? Especially when the investment dollars go back into the local ecosystem and the folks that have a vested interest in doing it in, the state of Indiana as opposed to, somewhere else. Right. Yeah.
We always say that we're like investing in the next 7-figure donor, like to the university. And sometimes people think that's true. Sometimes they're like, oh, that's just a statement. But depending on, like you find these heartstrings that you can pull on, and IU is a great one. And wanting to, invest in the next IU founders. People are really passionate about that. And I think it's interesting too. It's like, I don't do a ton of work on ecosystem development directly, but comparing like the ecosystems and, we don't want to be Silicon Valley. And it's like, I know multiple like leaders in the state talk about that, but Indiana can't be Silicon Valley because we just don't have that infrastructure here. And so how can we, invest in these companies to then contribute to our own ecosystem and contribute to like development and growth that is kind of standalone, but still, I guess, profitable. And I think it's, again, we're not going to be Silicon Valley. We shouldn't be. We're not going to be Boston. We shouldn't be. But like what works best for our ecosystem, I still think is being figured out. Yeah.
Yeah. Figuring out what the strengths are and then leaning into those, I definitely think is important. I guess in my mind, how often do you see like medical device and hard tech kind of pop up in your ecosystem versus, software as a service or, kind of more software minded medical applications. Obviously, there's a lot of them out there, a lot of them that are very successful. But it does seem like, at least if you think about through the lens of Indiana, up in the Warsaw area, that kind of thing. I mean, we do have a lot of medical device expertise and knowledge here in the state of Indiana. And are you seeing like an uptick in that? Do you think it's fairly flat? Like, what does that look like from your position?
Yeah, we definitely have always invested in mostly therapeutics. And I think it's just because our medical school that's what they're studying. However, we have seen an influx in medical devices and kind of the hard tech like spin. And, it's always like the life cycle of like coming back around. Like software was really interesting, but hard tech is the fundamental of like the world in a way. And so I think we are seeing a lot more medical devices, again, because the regulatory pathway is just a lot simpler. It's not easy, but it's a lot simpler. We actually only have one portfolio company that's a diagnostic. However, again, we're seeing a bigger push for these hard tech, maybe with like software as a component of that coming up in our evaluations.
Yeah. I know just even personally with my youngest son being a type 1 diabetic, like I've gotten way more interested in like wearable med device tech. But yeah, I think even looking out there at, there's a local company here. I wish I remember the name off the top of my head, but they're looking at like a medical device for detecting like epileptic episodes and stuff like that. But I think there's just like a whole lot of different areas for detection, prevention, all kinds of things within the hard tech space that I think is really starting to get interesting just because electronics now are getting small enough. There's really been a lot of push into making things more flexible, more wearable, more like compatible with basically being like worn or directly like interacting in a consistent basis with the human body, right? And even if you look at just the technology in a modern day Apple Watch and the health metrics and things that are possible now versus even 10 years ago, I think it's really interesting to see. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, like, for example, I've had a lot of cardiovascular health opportunities come up recently. I don't know why. They always seem to come in bundles for whatever reason. But one of them is a biologic. And so they're trying to develop the next material or drug to help better diagnose heart attacks to then further prevent heart failure. And again, they would have to establish like new regulatory codes or like go down like a new FDA pathway. And so I'm like, this is really interesting, but the market is super small of like what you're actually treating, like the obtainable treatable population. And then yesterday, I was just meeting with a founder that is targeting the same problem, but they have a sensor to detect like clot occlusion, like in your stent. And so it's not changing the patient journey at all. It's not changing the way it's treated, but you and your doctor will be better informed of how much like clotting in your stent is actually happening. So then you can actually just have like a similar treatment option or like up your dose of like a treatment or prevent like a major traumatic surgery or even, heart transplant. And I'm like, it's so cool sometimes when people are like, yeah, just do the simple thing. You don't need to develop this insane therapeutic. It's just developing the sensor that tracks that metric. And so you're just more informed.
Yeah. No, super cool.
I'm curious to go sort of all the way back to the beginning, those types of things. When they come in your door, I guess, to ask a question on behalf of a lot of our early stage clients, you have some minimal amount of dollars. And I guess for the sake of this question, we can talk hard tech because the term prototype will mean something different here, an investment to get there. What are you looking for? What piques your interest, especially with what someone's been able to do with sort of those initial early expensive funds?
Yeah, I think it's about, we always love having a conversation no matter like when in the pipeline. So even if you're like, hey, Emily, I have an idea, like just want to pass by you. I'm like, okay, like that's great. Like, and we'll chat about it and like keep me updated like on your progress. Almost like 80% of the people just don't communicate regularly. And so that's kind of a sub metric I'm tracking over time of like their communicative efforts. But I think too, it's like, how efficient are you spending your capital? Because it's like finances can get out of control, especially in med devices. And so it's like, if you at least are aware of your spending and are being efficient about it, like I'm good. However, again, it's like, it's good enough for now. It's like they can easily go off the deep rails. And so as long as you're checking in and be like, this is what we're testing for, And again, I think a major component is, are you testing, or like, are you running the study in a way that's translational to the clinic? Because if you're not, then you're not spending capital efficiently. And sometimes that's my job to tell them that. Sometimes it's their team to figure that out like themselves, or, maybe people like you have like, this is the best way to translate this product, because these are the results you're going to get. I think as long as you have a clear plan there, and then, money can truly go out the window in the med device world. So, but again, it's like, as long as you're efficient and then really clear on the outcomes that you're testing for, so then you can further raise like the next round because you did what you said you were going to do. I think that's very critical, especially in like early stage companies.
And translate to the clinic. When you say that, are you more speaking to the end user is already known, the end use environment is already known? So if you're designing in a vacuum over here, you're not doing yourself any justice, because there is an answer over on this other side that you could be designing for.
Yeah. Well, and it's like 510Ks are different. So like with medical devices, because as soon as that's like approved, then you can start selling within 90 days. But knowing who your customer is, how they buy, a lot of the times we have to know a lot about the hospital system and the payer system, because that's your customer. And that is not the fun part of evaluating an opportunity, because you have to know like, oh, the doctors are going to say you need to get this test. And so knowing like, knowing the patient journey, I guess, is a better way of putting it, like the translational potential. Because if they're coming in to the hospital and they're like, oh, my heart is hurting, if you don't say the right things, or if you're not testing for maybe, I'm trying to like not get too complicated on this, but like knowing that a heart attack is diagnosed by clot, like again, like a clot occlusion in like the vascularization, versus you're trying to develop a device that measures dead tissue, like that's not going to get approved in the clinic. It's an interesting metric that probably means something, but they don't diagnose that way. And so again, like, why are we doing that? You need to actually test like the vascularization. Right. Like that. Yeah. Hopefully that was simple.
And do you typically see, is there a type of founder that tends to see that other side of the problem better versus maybe just, pure science background, or how do you see the makeup there?
I mean, scientists usually do not see that because they're in the lab all day. Like they're doing the basic science. And again, that is my background. And so I get it. Like I understand why you only care about the cells, because I care a lot about the cells. But I think having like, we really like to see a different type of like CEO. If the scientist wants to be the CEO, that's usually a big like no, like for us, like we won't invest, because it's a different brain. And so if they have a different CEO, or if they have like a medical marketing professional, that's usually like the people that are getting the job done and knowing how that patient journey or in the clinic conversations are happening. Yeah. And so we like to see that on the team.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for sure makes a lot of sense. I'm just kind of curious. I know that we have a little bit of a shared background, kind of switching gears a little bit, but, with, Sunny Period Cup, how did you guys kind of come to be involved with them? For those that don't know, it's a menstrual cup startup that's a Glassboard client. But I thought that was kind of interesting that you guys were involved in that. I was just curious to know like how you came to find them, and then kind of what that investment journey is looked at from your guys' perspective.
Yeah. And so like, again, the IU network is very large. And so we've set up our fund where we get mostly like inbound deals now. So they're coming to us versus like us finding them. And so, Sunny, they were in the process of developing their product. I think they were like going through a crowdfunding opportunity. We knew that you all were working with them. And so they were like, hey, like we're doing this crowdfunding opportunity in addition, like having like a VC raise. Are you interested in the product? And it's interesting because our angel network, to be candid, is a lot of men. And so it's like, how do we sell this to a group of 140 men? Could be a hard sell. But again, finding like the unique application of it, like literally the applicator is the unique part of Sunny Period. And so from the first conversations, we're like, oh yeah, like this is interesting. Like keep us updated. And then, as they started getting more money in like their crowdfunding campaign, getting more involved with like you all, we trust you all. And so we're like, oh wow, like this is actually interesting, moving at like a decent pace. I actually, went through like the product, like trial, I guess, or like use of the product just to see if like this is easy to use or not, and like doing our own due diligence that way. And then again, they got approved for their 510K, like FDA, like approval.
Yep.
And so then
Big
it's
deal.
like, okay, now it's de-risked. Now like I want to do it. And so like, and so it's slowly but surely like tracking people over time and like seeing how they de-risk the opportunity. And obviously like the FDA approval is a huge one. And so we like to be last check-in, which I feel like is a cop-out answer.
So does every other investor, right? Like everybody.
Well, and it's funny because it's like in the ecosystem. So we're like, oh, we're tracking this. Oh, did you hear like Sunny got the 510K like approval? And they're like, yeah, we're going to go in. And I'm like, oh shoot, like I want to go in now too. And then it kind of becomes like a frenzy of like who's actually going to get in this round. And that's essentially like what ended up happening with Sunny. And I think if we didn't release the press release yet, it's like coming out very, very shortly about our investment in them. Yeah.
No, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is obviously a huge milestone, the regulatory approval. And then stepping that back, all the way at the beginning, you have just early concept idea, problem statement. Does that pique my interest? And then functional prototypes, are they working the way they said they would? Did they run up against any huge technical issues? In that concept idea, like problem statement phase, what are you most looking for there? Is it more, you've already mentioned, people not thinking about the market size, or maybe ways that they unintentionally sequester themselves into some smaller market. What are the things that you're looking out for, or the positive side of it that you're looking into?
Yeah, I think also like timing is very critical. And this is what I really like to do, because I just will do like a lot of research of like, okay, why is there a need for like a new product? And I mean, there was like an article released maybe 2 weeks ago about these 10 major like tampon brands still containing like chemicals in them. Right. And it's like, what the hell? Like, I'm a woman, and it's like every woman usually has a period. And so I think doing research on like why is now the right time as well. And then I love that, because that's like just straight research and like, running the data on that. And so kind of also advocating for the problem itself. And I think, it might be like an unknown fact, but VCs, it's like, we kind of have to sell this too. It's like, I'm running the due diligence, but I still have to make an investment case to the angels or to the fund of like, this is why it's interesting. They're working with, a maker studio to help build the product that's like a trusted source, still a huge problem, super unique application. And so, just kind of combining all of those things, it really creates like the perfect segment for investment.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one thing we push for, I'd say early in our discovery phases and the like, is creating a good story behind the product, right? And it sounds like that's a big piece of it, right? It is the entire story of the product, who's involved. Oh yeah, from top to bottom.
Yeah, and we're selling the story too. It's like, I'm the one meeting with all the founders. I have to take it back to my team and tell them who is worth meeting. Like a second meeting or a third meeting, and I have to sell the story too. And so sometimes it is helping, which I'm sure you guys do, helping the founder tell that story, and like, this is why it's interesting. This is why it's the right place, right time. And then, just again, being passionate about the solution as well.
Yeah, I think I even look historically at Glassboard, and early on, I would say one of the probably mistakes that we were making with startup companies was just focusing too much on how do we achieve the product development timeline and pathway the most efficiently. And I think something that dawned on us, and I think we've since pivoted pretty well, is to, particularly with startups, say, yeah, that's important, but what's actually even more important is figuring out what your investors or what the investment community cares about, as far as like wanting to see certain things before they're gonna invest, right? Because it doesn't do us any good if we pick the most efficient pathway, but we run out of money and then we crash and burn, right? So it's like a lot of times we find ourselves now saying, okay, here's the product development roadmap, but also, and a lot of times it's in the discovery process as well, have you talked to either your investors, if you already have them, or you talk to people in the investment community that would invest in your kind of like product or whatever you're doing, and saying, what do they need to see at like a seed stage? What are they going to need to see before they're willing to make like a Series A investment or different investments? And then as the product development firm saying, hey, we need to be able to help you meet those goals, right?
Yep.
Even if it means that it takes a little bit longer to develop the product, we have to take a less efficient path to bringing this to market. Like if things like de-risking the regulatory pathway or de-risking, the manufacturing process or whatever that is, like if we need to put that time in up front or out of order, how we would just normally do that, if it was just like, oh yeah, we've got all the money up front, I think it's important for us to realize that and also then help inform our folks that we work with, the founders and co-founders that we work with, to say, yeah, like you gotta make sure that your investors are happy and that they're seeing the things that they want to see. Because sometimes they're going to want to see things that don't make sense to you necessarily, but are going to move the needle for them to be able to unlock that next round of funding that allows you then as the co-founder or founder to go do the things that you want to do. Right. So there's like this give and take a lot of times that I think founders and co-founders sometimes don't always like see eye to eye. Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to have relationships with your investors, and if you can choose them, which I know it's hard to do that. It's hard to put together a fundraising round, but it is important. And I think that's what's nice about our network, again, because maybe we have an angel that's brought a ton of like commercial products like to market. Like he was on like 5Gum, like Suave, like worked for Unilever for like a super long time. IU guy, like lives down the street from me, and it's just like finding those like connections and real expertise, or like value is a better term, not just expertise, but having like the value creation there and the people that you surround yourself with is really important. And that's the fun part about, again, like the IU network, because we can go to them and say, hey, what are they missing at this stage? What should they do? Maybe they'll become like a board advisor or a board member. But again, especially in the life sciences space, it's really easy to fill or flood your board with just scientific expertise, but the value creation part isn't there. And so it's like, again, we have to move like in the best steps to achieve like the next fundraising round. And again, having the right people to help make those decisions is really critical.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about ecosystem and how folks think, and I think that's something we've also changed at Glassboard, has just been ensuring we pull in all of the right partners, that you're not making decisions in a vacuum. But we're all engineers, designers, and if we have a bias, it's going to be towards the thing that's technically innovative or higher performing. Like that's really what gets us excited. So it's really important to pull in the folks that can say the things like, well, that bumps you into a new product code, and that has a huge risk with it, right? And be able to bounce those ideas off of different minds that are thinking about the problem from a different angle.
Or I even know of like a slide that's in all of our discovery decks now, which is like stakeholder strategy. And I feel like that was like such a buzzword. Like I remember when you first like put that in, I go, Ben, like what on earth is this, right? Like, this seems very like buzzy, right? But no, I do think I've come to appreciate it, because up front it's saying, hey, here, is everybody that's going to be involved in this process, right? And so, yeah, if your investors, if you're VC backed, they are stakeholders, a part of this, right? Like they're gonna play a role in this whole process, but kind of just trying to even start to identify that from the front end. It can change, frequently does, or even sometimes you can put in TBDs there. But I think just overall looking at it, it's like, through every stage of the process, from start to finish, there's going to be different folks. And the more that you can identify that up front, or even identify, just like you said before, like weaknesses before they occur, like even just being aware of where your blind spots are, I think is an important function for any, person in the, in the entrepreneurial space. Right.
Oh yeah. And I think the founder is really, maybe they don't have all the technical skills, but they should have the big picture. And like, again, like the story and like being able to figure out the pieces of the puzzle and knowing who on your team or who in the community can help tackle like that piece of the puzzle. And so I think that's important to say too, because the founder doesn't have to know how to do everything, but you have to know how the whole like picture kind of comes together, especially as the company scales up. And I think that's the fun part of scaling and like, helping them create their own like, company, but like reputation and then confidence too. If like you don't have to know how to figure all this out at day one, but as long as you know how it all will play out in the future, I think that's good.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, yeah, Emily, I really appreciate you coming on today. I mean, I think it's been a really interesting conversation just to see overall like how you all approach things at IU Ventures. Again, the takeaway for me really is that I I think it's a cool mechanism by using that alumni network, right? I think that a lot of VCs are focused in a specific niche or, very like regional, like we pull in angel investors from the greater, Indianapolis area or Indiana area. And I think it's kind of a neat metric to leverage that, that alumni network and that almost, I'll call it like nostalgia. Like I think for a lot of people, like college is a very nostalgic thing. And so it's kind of neat to see that, when people graduate from, in this case, IU, and then they spread out across the country and they have careers and, everybody has levels of expertise and success, being able to like pull that all back to kind of something that again, in our case is here in Indiana is kind of a neat metric where it's probably doesn't work as easily for other VCs, right? Like they may have a hard time getting an investor in San Francisco to care about a company here in Indiana, right? But if that investor went to IU or has some affiliation there, then it's kind of like you were saying, like that heartstring where you can kind of tug on that nostalgia, be like, hey, remember that awesome time that you had at IU? Like, there's still people back here that are also coming up through the IU school or are connected to the university in some way that could really use your help, whether that's expertise or, monetary support or what have you. So I do think that's in my mind, a really interesting metric. And like you were saying, like helping other universities realize that that's something that they also can tap into is, I think, a really neat thing. But overall, I think it's just, it's a cool story and kind of cool to see how your career has kind of wound its way like into this space.
Oh yeah, I know it's definitely not been planned, but but we're figuring it out.
You didn't, when you were growing up, you didn't see yourself in this role probably. Or?
Oh no, I think I wanted to be a professional ice skater, and I think I've been on the ice like maybe 5 times.
That's perfect. Yeah.
So it's truly a dream. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Emily. I really appreciate the conversation.